Subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this unexpected encounter? The street siren and the tycoon. A love forged in contrasts. The acrid scent of urban decay clung to Chloe Vance, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn air of Mayfair, London's most exclusive district. Her bright orange sanitation uniform, usually a beacon of anonymity, felt like a spotlight as she heaved another overflowing bin. They called her the street siren, a whisper, a joke, a dismissal. But as she worked, unaware, a pair of piercing blue eyes watched from behind the ornate gates of a grand mansion, discerning a strength and brilliance far beyond the grime and the fluorescent vest. What he saw would challenge everything he thought he knew about ambition, purpose, and the woman who cleaned his streets. "You are worth so much more than this, Chloe." Her mother's words echoed in her mind as she adjusted her fluorescent yellow gloves. The orange uniform with reflective strips clung to her body under the relentless October sun in London. Chloe observed the imposing mansion before her, with its ornate gates and immaculate garden, so different from the small flat in the East End where she lived. A qualified engineer working as a street sweeper? What a waste. The voice of her ex-boyfriend, mingling with her mother's, hammered in her thoughts as she tossed another rubbish bag into the truck. 3 years in this job, and the voices wouldn't silence. 3 years since she'd abandoned her internship at a construction firm to take this job that paid better and allowed her to continue her university studies at night. Chloe adjusted the long black braid that escaped from her orange council cap and lifted her chin, as she always did when she needed to remind herself of her own dignity. 28 years old, an environmental engineering student, daughter of immigrants, and a street sweeper in Mayfair, the capital's wealthiest borough. How many contradictions could fit into a single person? Sweat trickled down her forehead as she collected another bag left in front of the mansion at number 288. She was so focused that she didn't notice when the gate opened and a man in an impeccable suit stepped out, stopping a few feet from her. "Excuse me." A masculine voice startled her. She turned quickly, already prepared for another inappropriate approach. Pickup lines, indiscreet glances, thinly veiled propositions were frequent. The nickname street siren that wealthy residents whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. "Yes?" she replied curtly, without really looking at the man. Continuing her work. "I want to speak with you." 4 simple words that, for some reason Chloe didn't immediately grasp, sounded different from the usual approaches. Perhaps it was the tone, neither condescending nor seductive, just urgent. She finally looked up. The man before her appeared to be in his mid-30s, a navy blue suit, perfectly tailored to his tall frame, carefully combed brown hair, stubble that looked more like an aesthetic choice than neglect. But it was his eyes that held her for an extra second. Intense blue eyes, which seemed laden with something she couldn't name. "I'm working, sir," she replied, turning her attention back to the next rubbish bag, ignoring the sudden acceleration of her heart. "If it's about the collection service, you can speak to the council." "It's not about that," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "It's about you. I need to speak with you." Chloe felt a shiver run down her spine, despite the heat. The man's persistence activated her defense mechanisms, built after years of harassment disguised as interest. "Look, sir, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm not interested in anything you want to propose," she said firmly, now looking at him with determination in her dark brown eyes. "I'm just a professional doing my job. I ask for respect." The man seemed genuinely surprised, even confused. He frowned and took a half step back. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "It's nothing like what you're thinking." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed to reveal nervousness. "I saw you yesterday at the university. You study environmental engineering at Imperial College London, don't you?" It was Chloe's turn to show surprise. How did this man know where she studied? The feeling of discomfort increased, now mixed with a pang of fear. London could be dangerous for women alone, and stalkers were not uncommon. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt inside. One hand discreetly sought her phone in her uniform trousers pocket. "How do you know where I study?" "I apologize," he replied quickly, realizing his mistake. "I'm being intrusive. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a visiting professor in the civil engineering department. Yesterday I attended your presentation on urban waste management and was impressed." Chloe blinked a few times, processing the information. She vaguely remembered noticing a man in a suit at the back of the auditorium during her project presentation. But she had been so nervous that she'd barely paid attention to the audience. "And what does that have to do with approaching me during my job?" she questioned, still suspicious, but the initial fear beginning to dissipate. Marcus took a deep breath before replying. "I lead an urban sustainability project funded by a private company. We are seeking innovative perspectives, especially from people with practical experience in the sector." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Your project on the impact of selective waste collection in communities of different social classes is exactly the kind of research we need. But when I tried to speak with you after the presentation, you had already left. And you decided to look for me how?" Chloe was still not convinced. "I asked your supervisor where I could find you," Marcus admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "He mentioned that you worked for the council but didn't specify what you did. Honestly, I didn't expect this." He made a vague gesture, indicating her uniform and the rubbish truck. The comment ignited a spark of irritation in Chloe. It was always like this, the sometimes thinly veiled surprise when people from certain circles discovered she worked as a street sweeper. This has a name, Mr. Thorne. It's called honest work, and it's thanks to this that I can pay for my university." The man visibly blushed, running his hand through his hair again. "I misspoke," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to disparage your work. On the contrary, I find it admirable, and, in fact, it makes your perspective even more valuable for our project." Chloe studied the man's face, trying to detect any sign of falsehood or condescension. She found only what appeared to be genuine embarrassment and, perhaps, sincere interest. Even so, years of experience with privileged people had taught her to keep her guard up. "Look, Mr. Thorne." "Marcus," he corrected automatically. "Please." "Mr. Thorne," she repeated, maintaining formality on purpose. "I'm in the middle of my shift. I have 3 more blocks to clean before lunch. If you want to talk about academic projects, the university is the appropriate place." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the fairness of her argument. "You're right. That was inappropriate of me." He took a card from the inner pocket of his jacket and handed it to her. "Here are my contacts. If you're interested in learning more about the project, call me or send an email. There's a research scholarship involved. Substantial." Chloe hesitated before taking the card, aware of the curious glances from her teammates working a little further down the street. What would they be thinking seeing her talking to this obviously wealthy man in front of one of Mayfair's most imposing mansions? She finally accepted the card and put it in her pocket, without looking. "I'll think about it," she said non-committally. "Yes, that's all I ask," he replied with a slight smile. "See you soon, I hope." Marcus turned and walked back to the mansion gate. Chloe watched him for a moment, noticing for the first time that the house he had emerged from had an elegant number affixed to the wall. 288. The coincidence made her frown. 288. It was also the number of the room where she had presented her project the previous night. "Hey, Chloe, dating the rich guys now, huh?" Liam's voice, her teammate, brought her back to reality. He approached with his collection cart, a mischievous smile on his lips. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied curtly, returning to work. "He was just asking for information." Sure. These Mayfair guys love asking the street siren for information, don't they?" Liam chuckled. Chloe rolled her eyes, ignoring the comment and the nickname she detested so much. She grabbed another rubbish bag and tossed it into the truck with more force than necessary. The card in her pocket seemed to burn through the fabric, reminding her of the strange conversation. "I want to speak with you." His words continued to echo in her mind as she went about her work under the relentless London sun. The small kitchen of her East End flat was permeated with the smell of the improvised dinner Chloe had prepared. Rice, beans, and a simple omelet. Sitting at the faded Formica table, she studied the card she had received earlier while chewing distractedly. Professor Dr. Marcus Thorne, Department of Civil Engineering, Imperial College. London, coordinator of the Sustainable Urban Project. Below were a phone number, email, and the logo of a company she recognized immediately. Thorne Industries, one of the largest in the country. She let her fork drop with a clatter onto the plate. Thorne. The mansion at number 288. It all made sense now. He wasn't just a visiting professor. He was a Thorne from the family that gave its name to that civil construction empire. What could someone like that want with a student who worked as a street sweeper? The suspicion returned with full force. In her experience, very wealthy people rarely took an interest in people like her without ulterior motives. What if this project was just an excuse for a personal approach? It wouldn't be the first time she'd faced this kind of situation. She picked up her battered laptop that rested on the edge of the table and opened it. She typed Marcus Thorne's name into the search engine and was immediately flooded with results. Photos at gala events, news about award-winning architectural projects, interviews in business magazines. The man truly was who he said he was, and more. Heir to Thorne Industries, but also a PhD in civil engineering from Stanford, with several published articles on urban sustainability. One of them caught her eye. Rethinking the solid waste cycle in Latin American metropolises. She opened the PDF of the article and began to read, increasingly surprised. The ideas presented there had impressive similarities to her own academic project, although approached from a macroeconomic perspective she hadn't considered. She continued researching and discovered that the Sustainable Urban Project was indeed a serious initiative, funded by the Thorne Family Foundation with international partnerships and a history of respectable publications. It didn't seem to be a facade or some kind of scheme. As she closed her laptop, Chloe felt conflicted. On one hand, the opportunity seemed genuine and potentially transformative for her academic career. On the other, years of working in London's wealthy boroughs had taught her to distrust the apparent good intentions of the privileged. She got up and went to the small balcony of her apartment. Night had already fallen over London, and the city lights created a luminous carpet that stretched as far as the eye could see. Somewhere in that sea of light were Mayfair's mansions, protected by high walls and security systems. And somewhere was also the university, where she tried to build a different future for herself. Two worlds she traversed daily, feeling she didn't completely belong to either. At the university, she was the oldest student, the scholarship recipient who worked as a street sweeper, an object of curiosity, sometimes forced admiration, rarely genuine respect. At work, she was the street siren, the one who studied doctor's stuff, the one who didn't fit the stereotype. And now this man, Marcus Thorne, who seemed to easily move between worlds that were so separate for her. Rich, educated, internationally recognized, heir to an empire, but interested in sustainability and apparently in her ideas. "I want to speak with you." His words returned to her mind, along with the image of those intense blue eyes that seemed to see beyond the orange uniform. Chloe sighed, feeling the day's exhaustion weigh on her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would need to wake up at 5 again. Work, university, required readings, the next phase of the project. Her life was a constant race against time and exhaustion, but before falling asleep, she picked up her phone and saved Marcus Thorne's number in her contacts. She wouldn't call, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth finding out what he really wanted. The week continued at his normal course, without Chloe making any contact with Marcus. On Thursday, during her solid waste management class, the professor mentioned a lecture on urban sustainability that would take place the following week. And we'll have a special guest, Dr. Marcus Thorne, who recently published a relevant study on the topic. Highly recommended for all of you, especially those developing projects in the area. Chloe felt a chill in her stomach upon hearing the name. It was too much of a coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't a coincidence at all. After class, she approached the professor. "Dr. Davies, this lecture by Marcus Thorne, did he suggest it?" The professor adjusted his glasses, surprised by the question. "Actually, yes. He contacted me a few days ago, saying he was interested in learning more about student projects. He specifically mentioned your work, in fact. Do you two know each other?" "Not exactly," Chloe replied, trying to sound casual. "He briefly approached me after the project presentation. Well, Marcus is an extraordinary person. He managed to transform a part of Thorne Industries into a benchmark in sustainability. It's not common to see heirs of empires genuinely dedicating themselves to environmental causes." The professor paused, observing her with interest. "It would be a great opportunity for you, Chloe. His Sustainable Urban Project is offering substantial research scholarships." "I'm aware," she said, remembering the card that still awaited. "I'll think about it." On her way home, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about the situation. What did this sudden interest from Marcus Thorne mean? Was it really about her academic project, or was there something more? And why had he sought her out during her street sweeping job when he could have easily scheduled a meeting at the university? She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she almost didn't notice when the bus arrived at her stop. She quickly got off and walked the 3 blocks to her building. A modest but well-maintained building where she rented an apartment since moving out of her parents' house. Upon entering the building manager, Mrs. Davies, called her from the reception. "Chloe, someone left something for you this afternoon." Intrigued, Chloe approached. Mrs. Davies handed her a plain brown envelope, with no sender. "Who brought this?" "A motorbike courier. Said it was urgent, but you weren't here." Chloe thanked her and went up to her apartment. Once inside, she cautiously examined the envelope before opening it. Inside was just a folder with the Sustainable Urban Project logo and a handwritten note on letterhead. "Chloe, I apologize again for the inappropriate approach. Attached is the complete material about the project and the research scholarship I mentioned. If you are interested, I would like to invite you for coffee after next week's lecture. I believe your unique perspective would be invaluable to our initiative. Sincerely, Marcus Thorne." The folder contained impressive details about the project. Partnerships with international universities, field studies in various Latin American cities, and a scholarship program that included a monthly remuneration that was more than double what Chloe earned as a street sweeper. Flipping through the documents, she found something that made her stop. A photograph of a group of researchers in the field, and among them was Marcus, not in a suit, but wearing simple clothes, collecting samples in an area that appeared to be a landfill on the outskirts of some large city. The date in the corner of the photo indicated it had been taken 2 years earlier. The image didn't match the figure of the heir in an impeccable suit who had approached her. It was as if they were 2 different people, the rich businessman, and the committed researcher. Chloe put the documents back in the folder and placed it on the table. The day's exhaustion weighed on her, but her mind was restless. She took a quick shower and sat on the bed with her phone in hand, looking at Marcus's contact she had saved days before. Finally, after several minutes of hesitation, she typed a message. "Dr. Thorne, this is Chloe Vance. I received your material about the project. I have some questions. Can we talk after your lecture next week?" She sent the message before she could change her mind and put the phone aside, convincing herself that he probably wouldn't reply at that hour of the night. To her surprise, less than a minute later, the phone vibrated. "I'm happy to receive your message, Chloe. Of course, we can talk after the lecture. I appreciate the opportunity. See you then." She read the reply several times, trying to decipher any hidden intention in the polite words. But the text was purely professional, neither cold nor overly friendly. She put her phone on silent mode and left it on the bedside table. Tomorrow would be another long day, starting at 5 in the morning at the Urban Cleaning Company's garage. As she tried to fall asleep, her mind alternated between contrasting images. Marcus Thorne in his perfect suit, saying, "I want to speak with you," in front of the mansion, and the same man, in simple clothes, studying waste in a landfill. Two different worlds, just like the ones she herself inhabited daily. Sleep finally overcame her, but not before a question formed in her mind. Could someone like Marcus Thorne really be interested only in her ideas, and not in the fact that she was the street siren of Mayfair? The answer, Chloe suspected, would define much more than just her participation in that research project. "What truly drives you, Chloe?" Marcus's question hung in the air between them. They were sitting in a coffee shop near the university, an hour after the lecture he had just given. The place was unpretentious enough for Chloe to feel comfortable, yet elegant enough that Marcus didn't seem out of place in his well-tailored suit. Chloe stirred her coffee, carefully considering how to answer. The lecture had been impressive. Marcus spoke with genuine passion about urban sustainability and waste management, citing practical experiences in various Latin American cities. Nothing in his presentation suggested the rich playboy she had initially imagined. Still, caution prevailed. "It wasn't exactly a choice," she finally replied. "It was a necessity. It pays better than many internships and has hours that allow me to study at night." Marcus nodded, his blue eyes observing her with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. "And why environmental engineering?" "That was a choice," she said, a slight smile appearing at the corner of her lips. "I grew up watching the river near my parents' home in the East End being swallowed by pollution. I saw entire communities suffering from floods that could have been avoided with proper planning. I wanted to do something about it." "And you ended up working directly with the waste you studied in theory," he observed. "There's a certain poetry in that." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Poetry? There's nothing poetic about collecting rubbish under a 30-degree sun, Dr. Thorne." "Marcus," he corrected automatically. "And I didn't mean to romanticize your work, only to observe that you have a perspective that most researchers don't, the practical, daily experience with the subject of study." She took another sip of coffee, studying him over the rim of the cup. Marcus Thorne was an enigma. During the lecture, several students, especially the women, practically threw themselves at him, trying to secure a moment of attention. After all, it wasn't every day you had contact with one of the heirs of Thorne Industries, known as much for his fortune as for his appearance on the list of London's 30 most eligible bachelors, according to a magazine Chloe had seen during her online research. However, after the presentation, he had politely declined all invitations to continue the discussion and came directly to meet her, who was waiting discreetly at the back of the auditorium. I imagine you didn't invite me for coffee just to discuss my choice of employment, Chloe said, deciding to get straight to the point. Marcus smiled, a smile that seemed genuine, without the air of superiority she frequently detected in Mayfair residents. You're right. I'll be direct then. He opened a folder he carried with him and slid some documents across the table. The Sustainable Urban Project is entering a new phase. We are looking to implement pilot programs for integrated waste management in communities with different socioeconomic profiles here in London. Your academic project on the impact of selective waste collection in different social classes aligns perfectly with our approach. Chloe examined the documents. A formal proposal for her to join the research team as a research fellow, with a monthly remuneration that made her eyebrows involuntarily raise. This is, she hesitated, searching for the right words. Generous. It's the standard value for all researchers on the project, he replied quickly, as if guessing her thoughts. We're not making any special exceptions. The clarification slightly irritated her. It was as if he was saying she wasn't special, just one researcher among others. But wasn't that exactly what she wanted? To be valued for her work, not for being the street siren. What exactly would be expected of me? She asked, flipping through the documents. Initially, consulting on the implementation of the pilot programs. Your practical experience would be invaluable in helping us avoid the common mistakes of those who only know theory. Then, direct involvement in field research, data collection and analysis, participation in publications. He paused. And eventually, the possibility of coordinating your own segment of the project. Chloe slowly closed the folder, her mind processing the implications. The opportunity was incredible, a chance to apply her ideas on a real scale, with resources she would never have access to otherwise. But there was something that still bothered her. Why me? She asked finally, looking him directly in the eyes. There are dozens of students at Imperial College London with similar projects, many with more academic experience than me. Marcus leaned slightly over the table, narrowing the distance between them. Because you understand both sides, he replied, with a sincerity that disarmed her momentarily. You're not just a theoretician talking about waste cycles from inside an air-conditioned classroom. You know the reality of the streets, of the people who do this essential, invisible work. And at the same time, you have the analytical capacity to transform that experience into structured knowledge. He smiled slightly. Besides, your project is brilliant. The way you correlated adherence rates to selective collection with socio-economic indicators is innovative. Chloe felt her cheeks flush slightly with the unexpected compliment. I need time to think, she said, regaining her composure. Naturally, Marcus agreed, leaning back in his chair. Take all the time you need. The project officially starts in January, but the sooner you decide, the more we can involve you in the initial planning. A comfortable silence settled between them as they finished their coffees. Through the coffee shop window, Chloe could see the constant flow of students entering and leaving the campus. Young people from different backgrounds, all seeking knowledge, opportunities, a better future. It was no different from what she herself sought. And if I accept, she said finally, will I continue working as a street sweeper? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus studied her for a moment before replying. That depends entirely on you, he said carefully. The scholarship is more than enough to replace your current income, but if you want to keep both jobs, the project schedule can be adapted. Chloe nodded, appreciating the non-prescriptive answer. He wasn't assuming she would drop everything to dedicate herself to the project, or worse, suggesting she should leave her street-sweeping job behind, as if it were something inferior. I have another question, she said, deciding to test the limits. Why did you come to speak with me yourself? Thorn Industries must have dozens of people who could recruit researchers for the project. Marcus seemed momentarily surprised by the direct question, but then he smiled, a different smile than before, more personal, less professional. Because when I read your project, I recognized something, a passion that goes beyond the academic, and when I saw you presenting, I was sure. He paused, carefully choosing his words. You genuinely care about the impact of your work on people's real lives. It's not just theory for you, and that's rare, Chloe, rarer than it should be. She held his gaze, looking for signs of falsehood or manipulation, but found only what appeared to be genuine admiration. It was disconcerting. Well, she said, breaking eye contact and checking her watch. I need to go. I have class in 20 minutes. Of course, Marcus nodded, signaling to the waiter. When Chloe started to open her purse, he raised his hand. Please, allow me. She hesitated, her pride battling practicality. The coffee wasn't cheap by her standards. Consider it a project expense, he said with a slight smile, seeming to read her thoughts. We're discussing business after all. Chloe agreed with a nod, acknowledging the logic of the argument. Thank you for the invitation, she said, standing up and collecting her purse. I'll contact you when I make my decision. I'll be waiting, Marcus replied, also standing politely. And Chloe? She stopped, already turning to leave. Regardless of your decision about the project, I'd like to continue our conversation. About urban sustainability, I mean. Your perspective is refreshing. There was something in the way he said it, without obvious flirtation, but with an undeniable personal interest, that made Chloe feel a slight tremor of, what? She didn't want to name the sensation. We'll see, she replied simply, and left the coffee shop for the warm London afternoon air. The next day, at 6 in the morning, Chloe was already on her usual collection route, this time in the borough of Islington. The sun had barely begun to warm the streets when her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text message. Good morning, Chloe. Just wanted to reiterate that it was a pleasure talking yesterday. If you need more information about the project, I'm available. Marcus. She looked at the screen for a moment, surprised by the message at such an early hour. Did he know she would already be working? Or was he just someone who started his day as early as she did? She put the phone away without replying. She needed to focus on work, and Marcus's message had already started a whirlwind of thoughts she preferred to postpone. The opportunity he offered was tempting, not just for the money, but for the chance to truly apply her ideas in a significant scale project. Hey, Chloe! Earth to Chloe! Liam's voice brought her back to reality. Are you daydreaming? The truck is already moving to the next street. Sorry, she murmured, quickening her pace to catch up with the rest of the team. But her mind remained divided between the concrete present, the weight of the rubbish bags, the unpleasant smell, the sweat already starting to trickle down her back, and the possibilities buzz opening up before her. During her lunch break, sitting with her colleagues in the shade of a tree in a small park, Chloe finally gave in to curiosity and opened Marcus's message again. She typed a brief reply. Good morning. Thank you for yesterday's invitation. I'm still reviewing the proposal. To her surprise, the reply came almost immediately. Completely understand. No rush. By the way, I'm giving a lecture at the London Cultural Centre on Saturday about sustainable urbanism in peripheral communities. Thought it might interest you. 2 p.m. Chloe smiled involuntarily. Marcus was clearly trying to maintain contact in a way that seemed professional, but with a subtext she couldn't ignore. Still, the lecture seemed genuinely relevant to her interests. I'll try to attend. Thanks for the heads up, she replied, keeping the tone neutral. For the rest of the week, Chloe divided her time between work, university, analyzing the documents for the Sustainable Urban Project. The more she read, the more impressed she became with the seriousness of the initiative. It didn't seem to be just a corporate social responsibility project to improve Thorne Industries' image. There was solid methodology, partnerships with reputable institutions, and a history of significant academic publications. On Saturday, after some hesitation, she decided to attend the lecture at the Cultural Center. She arrived a few minutes late and discreetly slipped into a seat in the last row of the already full auditorium. Marcus was on stage, speaking with the same passion he had shown at the university, but this time to a more diverse audience. Not just academics, but also community residents, representatives of neighborhood associations, and council employees. The topic was the implementation of green technologies in social housing, with a focus on waste management and renewable energy. What impressed Chloe most was the practical way Marcus approached the subject, without excessive academic jargon, focusing on real and accessible solutions, acknowledging economic limitations, but without using them as an excuse for inaction. When the Q&A session began, Chloe felt an urge to participate, but held back. She was there to observe, to better understand who Marcus Thorne was outside the controlled context of a one-on-one meeting. After the lecture, while most people clustered around the speaker, Chloe discreetly headed for the exit. She didn't want to appear eager for attention, but before she could reach the door, she heard her name. "Chloe, wait!" She turned to see Marcus politely making his way through the crowd, coming towards her. He was dressed more casually today, dark jeans and a light blue shirt, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, looking more like the researcher from the photo she'd seen in the project documents than the executive in a suit. "You came," he said, smiling as he reached her, seeming genuinely pleased. "What did you think?" "Impressive," she replied honestly, "especially the part about gray water reuse in housing estates. It's an approach I hadn't considered for my project." His face lit up with the technical comment, and soon they were immersed in an animated discussion about filtration systems and water reuse. Chloe was surprised by Marcus's practical knowledge. It wasn't just textbook theory, but information based on real experience. "Excuse me for interrupting, Dr. Thorne, but we have another engagement in 30 minutes. A man in a suit, whom Chloe presumed to be some kind of assistant, approached discreetly. Marcus frowned, checking his watch. "The meeting with the Urban Development Department, right?" When the assistant nodded, he sighed. "Could you give me a few more minutes, Raphael? And perhaps coffee for Dr. Vance and me, if she accepts." The assistant nodded and moved away, while Marcus turned back to Chloe. "Sorry about that, and also about the doctor. It's force of habit in academia. Still, I'm not a doctor yet," she corrected him. "It'll take a few more years and a lot of research for that." "A matter of time, I'm sure," he replied with a smile that seemed genuinely confident in her abilities. "Care for a quick coffee before I have to rush to my next meeting?" Chloe hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. There was no harm in a public coffee, and she was genuinely interested in continuing the technical discussion. They headed for the Cultural Center's coffee shop, a small but pleasant space with wooden tables and large windows overlooking an inner garden. The assistant, Raphael, was already there, having secured a discreet table in the corner. He quietly withdrew after delivering the coffees. "So," Marcus said, after taking a sip of his espresso, "have you made a decision about the project?" The direct question caught her slightly off guard. She had expected more social conversation before returning to the professional topic. "I'm still considering," she replied cautiously. "It's an important decision. It would significantly change my routine." "I understand perfectly." He paused, studying her for a moment. "May I ask a personal question?" Chloe nodded, though with some reservation. "What truly motivates you? Beyond all the practical reasons, the salary, the education, the career, what makes you get up at 5 in the morning to collect rubbish and then spend the night studying?" The question caught her unprepared. It wasn't the kind of thing the rich folks from Mayfair normally cared to know about a street sweeper's life. Chloe took a sip of coffee, buying time to organize her thoughts. "My father was a bricklayer," she finally said. "He built half the luxury buildings in Islington, but he never got to live in anything like what he helped create. When he fell ill, I discovered that years of breathing cement dust without proper protection had destroyed his lungs. The construction company he worked for, not yours," she added quickly, "offered minimal compensation, not even enough for medication." Marcus listened attentively, his face showing an empathy that seemed genuine. "That's when I realized we need to change how cities are built and maintained, not just physically, but the entire system that determines who benefits and who pays the price for progress." She paused, feeling suddenly vulnerable for having shared something so personal. "And you? What makes a Thorne interested in rubbish and wastewater when you could be in Monaco sailing a yacht?" Marcus smiled at the provocation, but his eyes remained serious. "My mother died of cancer when I was 12, he said, surprising her with the personal revelation. "Years later, we discovered that the condominium where we lived had been built over an old industrial waste dump that was improperly sealed by my own family company." He paused, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Thorne Industries paid millions in compensation and hushed up the case, but that didn't bring my mother back, nor the mothers of 3 other children from that condominium." Chloe observed him in silence, seeing him in a new light. The pain in his eyes seemed too genuine to be fabricated. "When I took a position in the company after my doctorate, I promised myself that I would transform the way we build cities, that every project would consider its long-term environmental impact, especially in the most vulnerable communities." He smiled sadly. "My father and the board call me an idealist. They say I'm sacrificing profit margins for utopian dreams." "And are you?" Chloe asked, genuinely curious. "In the short term, yes. But I'm convinced that sustainability is not only ethically correct, it's also the only viable business model in the long run." He looked at her intensely. "That's why I need people like you on the project. People who understand in practice the real consequences of the decisions we make in air-conditioned boardrooms." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but charged with something Chloe wasn't ready to name. There was an unexpected connection there. 2 people from different worlds, united by a shared vision, even if their motivations had distinct origins. Marcus's phone vibrated, breaking the moment. He checked it with a sigh. "Raphael is subtly reminding me that I'm about to be late for the meeting with the department." Chloe nodded, strangely disappointed by the abrupt end of the conversation. "Go ahead. Thanks for the coffee." Marcus hesitated, seeming reluctant to end the meeting. "Chloe, he started, then seemed to rethink. "Have you decided about the project?" She studied him for a moment, then made her decision. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll accept the position." His face lit up with a genuine smile. "That's excellent. Truly excellent. I'll instruct my team to prepare the formal documents on Monday. With one condition," she added, raising a finger. "I'll keep my street sweeping job, at least initially. Maybe reduced hours, if it's possible to negotiate with the council. But I don't want to lose that contact with practical reality." Marcus observed her with what seemed to be a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Absolutely. We'll adapt the project schedule as needed." He extended his hand for a formal handshake that she accepted. The contact was brief, professional, but Chloe couldn't help but notice the warm firmness of his fingers around hers. "Welcome to the Sustainable Urban Project, Chloe Vance." As she watched Marcus rush off to his meeting, Chloe felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was about to enter a completely new world, working side by side with people like Marcus Thorne, people whom, until recently, she would have considered inhabiting a reality entirely separate from her own. But there was something else there, something that unsettled her. The way Marcus looked at her, not as the street siren, not as an academic curiosity, but as someone whose perspective and ideas he genuinely valued. It was disconcerting, and, she admitted, reluctantly to herself, as she left the cultural center for the warmth of the London afternoon, strangely attractive. The following Monday, Chloe faced her street-sweeping shift with renewed energy. There was something liberating in knowing that this was now a choice, that she could leave the job if she wanted. But she was choosing to continue for reasons that went beyond financial necessity. When the collection truck entered Mayfair, she couldn't help but look for the mansion at number 2888. To her surprise, the gate was open and a black luxury car was leaving. The driver stopped when he saw her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Marcus in the back seat, formally dressed for what she presumed was a day of work at Thorn Industries headquarters. "Good morning, Chloe," he greeted her with a smile. "The project documents are being prepared. My assistant will contact you to schedule the formal signing." "Good morning, Mr. Thorn," she replied, aware of the curious glances from her teammates. "I'll await the contact." There was a brief moment when they simply looked at each other, as if there was more to be said, but neither of them knew exactly what or how. "Have a good day at work," he finally said. "You too," she replied, turning her attention back to the rubbish bags she needed to collect. The car drove off, leaving her with a strange sense of anticipation. Something was beginning, not just a new professional project, but perhaps something more, something still undefined that hung in the air between her and Marcus Thorn. "So the rich guy really has a thing for you, huh?" Liam's voice brought her back to reality. "First he approaches you on the street, now he stops his fancy car just to say good morning. What's going on, Chloe?" "It's professional," she replied curtly, tossing a particularly heavy bag into the truck. "I'm going to be part of a research project he's coordinating." Sure. Research," Liam chuckled, making air quotes with his fingers. The guy must have 50 doctors wanting to research with him, but he chose the street siren of Mayfair. What a coincidence, right? The comment hit a sensitive spot. It was exactly the kind of insinuation Chloe most feared, that any opportunity she received would be attributed to her appearance, not her abilities. "He was interested in my academic project, Liam," she said, her voice gaining a sharp edge. "Believe it or not, some people can see beyond the uniform and see a functioning brain." Liam raised his hands in surrender, realizing he had crossed a line. "My bad, Chloe. Just kidding." She nodded stiffly and returned to work, but Liam's words lingered in her mind. Would this be everyone's perception? That she was receiving special treatment for being attractive? That there was something beyond the professional in Marcus's interest? And worse, she herself couldn't deny the strange electric current that seemed to run between them during their conversations. The way their eyes sometimes met and held contact for a second longer than necessary. The way he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas, her opinions, her story. As the truck moved through Mayfair's tree-lined streets, Chloe tried to push these thoughts away. The important thing now was the project, the professional opportunity. Anything else would be an unnecessary complication. But when the truck passed the mansion at number 288 again on the way back, she couldn't help but look at the closed gates, imagining what the world inside those walls would be like. Marcus Thorn's world, so different from hers. And, for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, these two worlds were not as irreconcilable as she had always believed. 3 months had passed since Chloe signed the contract with the Sustainable Urban Project. London's autumn had now given way to a summer that announced itself with increasingly hot days. In the small office assigned to her at Thorn Industries headquarters, she was finalizing the last details of the report on the first pilot program implemented in Brixton, in the south of the city. "So, The results were promising. The adherence rate to selective waste collection had increased by 47% in the first 2 months after the installation of community recycling stations and the start of the environmental education program. Numbers that exceeded her own expectations and confirmed her thesis on the importance of adapting waste management systems to the socio-economic particularities of each community. A gentle knock on her open office door made her look up. Marcus stood at the entrance, wearing dark dress trousers and a blue shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, what she had already identified as his uniform for days when he spent more time in the field than in formal meetings. "May I come in?" he asked with a smile. "Of course," Chloe replied, indicating the chair on the other side of her desk. "I was just finalizing the Brixton report." Marcus sat down, leaning slightly forward with genuine interest. "And, did the final numbers confirm our expectations?" "They exceeded them," she said, unable to contain the pride in her voice. She turned her computer screen so he could see the graphs. A 48% increase in adherence, and most importantly, it continued to grow even after the initial novelty period. "That's extraordinary, Chloe," he said, genuinely impressed. "Especially considering we tried the same approach 2 years ago in Tower Hamlets, without even half that success. The difference is in the community engagement model," she explained, pointing to another graph. "In Tower Hamlets, you implemented the project top-down. In Brixton, we recruited local leaders from the start. We adapted the system to the community's existing routines. Your practical experience made all the difference," he observed. "Most of our previous consultants had never collected a rubbish bag in their lives." Chloe smiled, acknowledging the implicit compliment. In their 3 months of working together, she had developed a growing respect for Marcus's knowledge and dedication. He wasn't just a rich air-playing environmentalist, as she had initially suspected. He was a serious researcher with solid technical knowledge and a genuine passion for transforming how British cities dealt with their waste. "The board wants to present the results at the quarterly meeting next week," Marcus said, bringing her back to the present. "I'd like you to give the main presentation." "Me? But you're the one who normally presents the project reports." "Exactly," he replied with a smile. "It's time for them to see that I'm not the only idealist on the team. Besides, no one can explain the results better than the person responsible for achieving them." She hesitated, a slight knot forming in her stomach. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Marcus. The Thorn Industries board isn't exactly the kind of audience used to hearing presentations from, well, from people like me." "People like you?" Marcus frowned. "Brilliant? Dedicated? Innovative? You know what I mean," she retorted, feeling her face flush slightly. "A scholarship recipient who still divides her time as a street sweeper isn't exactly the typical profile of presenters at a board meeting of one of the country's largest construction companies. That's precisely why it has to be you, Chloe. They need to see that real solutions come from people who understand real problems, not from designer consultants who have never set foot in a community without air conditioning." Chloe observed him for a moment. Marcus rarely spoke about his relationship with his father, but in the few comments he had let slip, she had perceived the complexity of the situation. Love mixed with disappointment, professional respect undermined by fundamental ethical differences. "All right," she finally said. "I'll do the presentation." His face lit up with a genuine smile. "Thank you. I know it's not easy, but trust me, your voice needs to be heard in that room." Chloe nodded, trying to ignore the tingling sensation she felt, seeing him so happy with her agreement. In recent months, it had become increasingly difficult to maintain a strictly professional relationship, not for lack of trying on both sides. On the contrary, both she and Marcus seemed carefully committed to maintaining an appropriate distance. But there were moments, a glance that lasted a second too long, a conversation that extended beyond work hours, a shared coffee while reviewing data late into the night, when the electricity between them became almost palpable. "Oh, I almost forgot," Marcus said, getting up to leave. "Today is your last day collecting in Mayfair, right?" Chloe nodded. With the increased workload on the project, she had gradually reduced her hours as a street sweeper, keeping only one weekly route. Even that was about to end, as the academic semester intensified and the project demanded more of her time. "Yes, last day. I'll miss it, in a way. Hard to imagine missing collecting rubbish under the sun," he commented with a curious expression. "It's not the rubbish I'll miss," she explained. "It's the direct connection to the reality of the city, the constant reminder of why we're doing this work." Marcus observed her with what seemed to be a mixture of admiration and something more she couldn't name. "You are extraordinary, Chloe Vance," he said simply before leaving. She stood looking at the empty doorway for a moment, trying to decipher what lay behind those words, and more importantly, why her heart raced every time he said things like that. The headquarters of Thorn Industries occupied the top 10 floors of an imposing skyscraper in Canary Wharf, London's financial heart. On the 35th floor, the boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The same city whose future was decided at that polished, dark wood table. Chloe nervously adjusted the gray blazer she had bought especially for the occasion. It was the most expensive item she had ever acquired, even with a discount. And yet she felt out of place among the executives in their Italian suits and the female executives in their designer-tailored outfits. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked discreetly, approaching her as the board members took their seats. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," she replied automatically, then sighed. "Actually, I'm nervous. I don't think I've ever spoken to a group with so much money gathered in one room." He smiled, leaning slightly towards her. "Remember, they may have the money, but you have the knowledge they need. That evens the playing field." Before she could reply, the door opened, and a tall, gray-haired man entered the room. Even without ever having seen him in person, Chloe immediately recognized Arthur Thorn, the chairman of Thorn Industries and Marcus's father. The physical resemblance was evident. The same blue eyes, the same athletic build, but where Marcus radiated an accessible, almost informal energy, his father exuded authority and distance. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin," Arthur announced, taking his place at the head of the table, without greeting anyone individually. His eyes briefly passed over Chloe with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Marcus, you have 30 minutes for the Sustainable Urban Project update. As agreed, we'll save questions for the end." Marcus nodded and stood up. "Thank you, Father. Today, in fact, the presentation will be led by Dr. Chloe Vance, coordinator of the Brixton pilot program and primarily responsible for the results we're about to share." Taking a deep breath, Chloe stood up and walked to the front of the room. She connected her laptop to the projector, and as her presentation loaded on the giant screen, she met Marcus's eyes, who offered her an encouraging smile. As she progressed through the presentation, showing data, graphs, and photos of the project in the field, Chloe felt her confidence grow. This was her element, not the expensive suits or the luxurious room, but the technical knowledge, the practical experience, and the concrete results. She explained how each element had been designed, considering the community's particularities, based on both academic research and her own experience as a street sweeper. And most impressively, she concluded, showing the final slide, the total project cost was 32% lower than initially estimated, with results 40% higher than our most optimistic projections. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Even Arthur Thorn seemed genuinely interested now, leaning slightly forward in his chair. "Thank you for your attention. I'm available for questions," Chloe finished. There was a moment of silence. Then hands began to rise. To her surprise, the questions were technical, relevant, demonstrating that they had truly paid attention. Chloe answered each one confidently, occasionally looking at Marcus, who watched her with evident pride. Finally, Arthur Thorne raised his hand. The entire room fell silent. "Dr. Vance," he began, his deep voice echoing in the room. "The results are undoubtedly impressive, but there's a question that goes beyond the numbers. In your opinion, are these results replicable on a large scale, or are we facing an isolated case of success that depends on very specific conditions?" The question was astute, touching exactly on the point that most concerned investors: scalability. Chloe realized that despite all the stories Marcus had told about his father's resistance to sustainable initiatives, Arthur Thorne was not a foolish or superficial businessman. "An excellent question, Mr. Thorne," she replied, maintaining eye contact. "The short answer is yes, it is replicable, but not as a single, inflexible model. What makes our approach scalable is precisely the method of adapting to local realities. Instead of a standardized system that we apply indiscriminately, we developed a framework for analysis and implementation that adjusts to the particularities of each community." She paused, then decided to dare a little more. "If you'll allow me, the analogy is like building structures. Thorne Industries doesn't apply the exact same blueprint to different plots of land. You adapt the structure to geological conditions, local regulations, the specific needs of each client. Our approach to waste management follows the same logic: solid structural principles, applied with intelligent flexibility." Arthur observed her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise in the room, he smiled. "A precise analogy, Dr. Vance, and quite insightful." He turned to the rest of the board. "I believe we've seen enough to make a decision about the project's expansion. I suggest we return to this about after the coffee break." During the break, to Chloe's surprise, Arthur Thorne approached her. "Dr. Vance," he greeted her formally, "I'd like to congratulate you on your presentation. I rarely see such well-substantiated data in projects of this nature." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Marcus mentioned that you maintained your work as a municipal collector, correct?" "Street sweeper," she corrected gently. "Yes, although I've reduced my hours in recent months." "An unusual choice," he observed, with no explicit judgment in his voice. "A practical choice," Chloe replied. "It keeps me connected to the reality of what we're trying to transform." Arthur observed her for another moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. Well, I hope we can talk more after the board's decision. I have some ideas about possible applications of your model in our new social housing developments." Back in the boardroom, Arthur resumed his place at the head of the table. "After consideration of the results presented by Dr. Vance and discussion among the board members, we have reached a decision on the Sustainable Urban Project." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting Marcus's. "The board unanimously approves the expansion of the project to 5 more communities in the next quarter, with the budget increased by so." Marcus couldn't suppress a smile of surprise and satisfaction. Chloe felt an immense relief wash over her. Her work had been validated at the highest possible level. "Additionally," Arthur continued, "the board determines the creation of a new division within the company, Thorne Sustainability, focused specifically on integrating sustainable practices into all of the group's ventures, starting with the social housing developments of the Good Living program." He looked directly at Marcus. "The division will be chaired by Marcus Thorne, reporting directly to me." And Arthur continued, now looking at Chloe. "The board strongly recommends the permanent hiring of Dr. Chloe Vance as the Director of Research and Implementation for the new division, as soon as she completes her studies." Chloe felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. An executive position at Thorn Industries was so far removed from anything she had imagined for her future that for a moment she didn't know how to react. The sun was already setting when they left the Thorn Industries building. The lights of Canary Wharf began to flicker on, creating that characteristic glow of London nights. "Where do you want to go?" Marcus asked, as they walked side by side on the pavement. Chloe thought for a moment, then smiled. "I know a place. It's not fancy, but it has the best sausage rolls in the city." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small bakery in Islington, the kind of family-run establishment that miraculously survived among expensive commercial buildings. The simplicity of the place seemed to ease some of the tension between them. It was hard to maintain formalities while sharing a basket of still-warm sausage rolls and 2 coffees served in simple ceramic mugs. "You were right," Marcus said, after biting into a sausage roll. "It really is the best in the city." "I discovered this place during my collection routes," she explained. "The owner, Mrs. Henderson, always separated the recyclables perfectly and offered coffee to the team. The kind of person who makes you believe that small actions matter." Marcus observed her with a soft smile. "That's what I admire most about you, Chloe. Your ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, to value every person, every small gesture that contributes to a greater good." Chloe took a sip of coffee, considering his words. "You see," she observed, "it's not common for someone in your position." "I've had a good teacher in recent months," he replied with a smile. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, the kind of silence that only exists when there's enough trust not to fill it with unnecessary words. "Chloe," Marcus said finally, his tone becoming more serious. "We need to talk about what happens now." "Professionally, you mean?" she asked, though she knew it wasn't just about that. "Not just that," he replied, confirming her thoughts. "We both know there's something between us. Something we've carefully avoided for the past few months." Chloe lowered her eyes to her cup, feeling her heart race. "For good reasons," she said softly. "We work together. You're technically my superior, and we're from completely different worlds." "They were good reasons," Marcus agreed, "especially when you had just joined the project. No one could say that your position was influenced by anything personal." He paused. "But now, after what happened today, your position has been validated by the entire board, including my father. Your merits have been recognized at the highest possible level." She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "And as for the different worlds?" she asked, expressing the fear that haunted her most. "You're a thorn. I'm from the East End. Some abysses are too wide to cross, Marcus." He extended his hand across the table, not to touch hers, but as an invitation. "Do you know what I discovered in these months working with you, Chloe? That these different worlds are much more fragile constructs than we think. That in the end, we are all just people, trying to make sense of our lives, seeking connections that make us feel less alone on this planet." "It's a romantic view," she observed, though she felt her heart opening to his words. "Perhaps," he agreed with a small smile, "but it's also true, at least for me." Marcus paused, taking a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Chloe, ever since that first day, when I saw you in Mayfair and said, 'I want to speak with you,' something in me recognized something in you. As if, somehow, inexplicably, I knew you would change my life." The intensity in his blue eyes left her speechless for a moment. It was as if all the barriers, carefully built over the past few months, were simultaneously crumbling. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, her voice little more than a whisper. "Scared that this is just a moment, a curiosity, an adventure for you, and for me, it would be so much more." "And what if it's so much more for me, too?" he asked, his voice equally low. "And what if I'm as scared as you are, but even more scared of the idea of letting you leave my life without ever having said what I truly feel?" Chloe felt tears forming in her eyes, an overwhelming emotion growing in her chest. "And what do you truly feel?" she asked, finally allowing herself to ask the question she had avoided for months. Marcus finally touched her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "That I love you, Chloe Vance. Not for your beauty, although you are beautiful. Not for your brilliant mind, although I admire it deeply. But for your heart, for the way you see the world, with compassion, with clarity, with the determination to make it better, no matter how difficult." Tears now streamed freely down Chloe's face, but she didn't care. Something that had been trapped inside her for so long was finally set free. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming out as if they had a will of their own. "And it absolutely terrifies me." Marcus smiled, his own eyes shining with contained emotion. "Do you know what my mother used to say before she died? That fear is never a good enough reason not to do something your heart knows is right." He stood up and walked around the table, sitting beside her on the small bench. With delicacy, he touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. For a moment, they just looked at each other, as if engraving every detail into memory. Then, slowly, Marcus leaned in and kissed her. A soft, gentle kiss, full of unspoken promises. When they parted, both were smiling, as if they had discovered something precious that had been there all along, just waiting to be recognized. "And now?" Chloe asked, her voice still trembling with emotion. "Now," Marcus replied, holding her hands in his, "we build something together. A project much bigger than anything we've ever imagined. A life where the barriers between our worlds no longer exist." That night, as they walked hand in hand through the illuminated streets of London, Chloe thought about the improbable journey that had brought her there. From the orange uniform in Mayfair to the boardroom of Thorne Industries. From initial distrust to the love that now overflowed in her heart. 4 words had changed everything. 4 simple words that day, under the relentless sun, had sounded different from all the approaches she had ever heard before. "I want to speak with you." And finally, after months of hesitation, they were truly speaking. Not just with words, but with their hearts completely open to each other. Without fear, without barriers. Just the simple, powerful truth of 2 worlds that, against all odds, had found a way to become one. Did you find Chloe and Marcus's story inspiring? Comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected connections and triumphs.